Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I am thrilled to tell you that the Codist is back in print, on the market, both in Kindle version and in paperback. After a long battle, the victory is ours, and now you too can read about this diabolical plot that Satan has for weaponizing DNA to wipe out the lineage that will bring the return of Jesus. It's a story that's being told that is opening up the eyes of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that are sending off for their DNA to be tested because they're interested in their background. Well, there's an enemy out there that would love to use that against you. Read about that in the Codist. Also, go to the ignitingnation.com website, scroll to the bottom of the page, put in your email address, and get the first chapter of the new book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. I take you on a journey from the Garden of Eden to the Tree of Life in the book of Revelation, and God uses the things of the natural to teach you supernatural truths. It's my pleasure this morning to bring you this amazing book and story from Elizabeth Oates called Mending Broken Branches, When God Reclaims Your Dysfunctional Family Tree. Most people know Elizabeth Oates as a poster child for women who grew up as a product of dysfunctional families. A typical Generation X kid, her family tree was plagued with generations of divorce, addiction, abuse, abandonment, and general brokenness. Yet, over the years, God taught her that she's more than her deep roots. She's a child of the King. She overcame her past and earned her undergraduate degree from Baylor University, her master's in Christian education with a focus in marriage and family studies from Dallas Theological Seminary. She's authored 2 books, including Dealing with Divorce, Finding Directions When Your Parents Split Up, and If You Could See as Jesus Sees, Inspiration for a Life of Hope, Joy, and Purpose. All that sounds fancy, but Elizabeth knows God doesn't care about achievement. He cares about calling, and He called her to share a message of hope, healing, and restoration. Today, Elizabeth lives in the suburbs of Waco, Texas, with her husband Brandon and their 4 loud children, including 3 biological and 1 they adopted through foster care. Her life sounds embarrassingly cliche, yet Elizabeth knows no matter how perfect our Instagram post, no matter how Pinterest-worthy our homes, no matter how well manicured our lawns, we all need Jesus. Elizabeth Oates, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Elizabeth, first of all, thank you. Thank you for writing a book addressing, today dysfunctional family is like almost said at a whisper. Back when I grew up, cancer was always hushed. People would say, they would whisper it. They would never say the word out loud. Today there's a lot of cancer, a lot of people dealing with cancer. It's now a capital C as opposed to a little c. But you found a way to address the fact that most of us, in our own way, come from dysfunctional backgrounds. The models, the examples that we have are really broken branches.
Right.
But is that by God's design? Is that a consequence of our sin? Or is it that God makes us strong in the broken places? And if we all had perfectly functional families, would we ever want to join the family of God?
Right. Oh, that's a big question. I think it dates back to, Adam and Eve. And I think I talk a lot about this in the book that, like you said, we are all fallen. And so none of us is going to have a perfect family. We are all going to have some level of dysfunction. And I talk about this as well, that dysfunction, it's a spectrum. Some of us have dysfunction that's very easy to identify, whether that is divorce, addiction, abuse, those big things that are very easy to pinpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of us have dysfunction that is a little bit more, difficult to identify. Maybe some of us have just some sibling rivalry that was never rectified, and it carries on into adulthood. Maybe some of us have parents who were just very controlling or overly critical, and then that has manifested into just low self-esteem as we've turned into adults. And so, our dysfunction, it covers a wide span within our families, but it all goes back to that root issue of we are all sinful people. And as parents, we try really hard, but we bring our own baggage into our marriages and into our parenting. And, as children, we bring our own insecurities into our childhoods, and everybody is just navigating these familial waters. And we don't come into families with a rule book. We come into it with scripture, but unfortunately not all families are following that rule book of scripture. And so we are all a mess. And we see that in scripture as well, that, families in the Bible messed up big time.
It's so interesting you say that I always talk about the story of Jacob. Imagine walking in and saying these words, "Hi, honey, 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 I'm home."
Yeah.
4 wives. There was a world out there at a time when God wanted to call us to replenish the earth, and we did that. And there was polygamy was a way of life under a legal system for the purpose of replenishing and repopulating and building what became the nation of Israel, so that the Messiah could come from a lineage that couldn't be broken or torn apart. You in your life have had to go through, I almost want to call it a recovery program.
Right.
You didn't have an addiction. You didn't have what we would call things that you need to go through a process where you need to be delivered from addiction or from pornography or from alcoholism. You went through a recovery of your own because of your own experience and reached a point where either you were going to break it or it was going to break you.
Right, exactly. So, just growing up in a dysfunctional family, my parents divorced when I was about 2 years old. My mom went on to remarry when I was in middle school, and my biological dad was not really ever a part of our lives, in and out, in the early years, but then just kind of faded out. And she remarried when I was in middle school, divorced when I was in high school, and then remarried again when I was in college and divorced after that. So, lived through a lot of divorce. And I think anyone who's been through divorce can agree that, divorce is not one thing. There's always a lot of other, symptoms that kind of add up to or lead to that divorce. And so, once I was post-college, like you said, I had to go through a lot of recovery, and that entailed a lot of reading books, which I think is why I'm so passionate about writing books, because, at the time I didn't have any other resources other than just reading books to try to kind of work through and process everything I'd been through. Eventually, I did start meeting with a mentor, and that helped. I did start seeing a counselor, just to try to, just sort of unpack all of this baggage that I had accumulated over the years. And, you say that I didn't have any addictions or anything, but I think anyone who has been through, that much trauma, and it took me a long time to really own up to the fact that I had been through trauma, which I've learned is anything that is not nurturing. And so, that would qualify me to have been through some trauma. And, I did have my weaknesses. And so, for me, the way that I coped with everything I'd been through was I became an overachiever to an unhealthy extreme. I turned to exercising in college, food restriction, because that was something that I could control. When I could control nothing else with my family or my life, those are some areas that I could control. And so, definitely went to some unhealthy behaviors. Thankfully it was nothing that the Lord couldn't bring me back from or heal me from. But definitely I had some scars and some things that I had to work through. But I love what you said about, my own recovery. And I think that's anyone who is from a dysfunctional family. You have to be intentional about going backwards, working through the pain of your past if you want to have a healthier future.
It's interesting. All of us have scars of certain kinds. I have scar on my thumb. It goes all the way back to 1971, 72 in college. I remember exactly what happened. Now, I can look at it, I can touch it, I cannot feel any pain. It's only a reminder of a past experience. However, as I've been counseling for many years and working with a lot of people, one of the things I realized that if you go to the doctor and you say, "Doctor, I have a pain," and he starts pressing around and he says to you, "Does that hurt?" And you go, "No." "Does that hurt?" You go, "No." And then he hits that spot and you cry out in pain. What does he always do?
He diagnoses you with something.
He does it again.
Oh, yes.
He always pushes a second time. All right? And our natural instinct is, wait a second, I just told you that hurt. Mm-hmm. Well, the first time is to identify where the pain is. Now he's beginning to look for the source of the pain.
Right.
When we look at our lives and there are buttons and triggers and there are things that happen, it's natural for us to have certain response mechanisms that come from our past that we've used to cope and protect, to distance, to wall off, to do many things to protect ourselves. But as we grow in maturity in the Lord, as we grow in maturity in relationships, we have to ask ourselves, when that button gets pushed, we often lash out at the person that pushed the button. Well, they're no different than the doctor. We have to then become the diagnostician that says, wait a second, that hurt. Mm-hmm. I have to ask myself, why did that hurt? Why do I have a place in me that hurts when I hear those words or I see that action? And we then begin to take responsibility. We find most of the time, and I'll ask your opinion on this, do you think that this is a soulish connection to the past and that we have these soul ties? We look at what we refer to as generational curses, but curses have been broken through the shed blood of Jesus. But that doesn't mean that just because I've been given permission to let go of the rope, that I actually do let go of the rope.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people stayed tied to the past because they don't know any different. They don't know anything else. And a lot of people they've never been given a voice. They're very enmeshed in their dysfunction. So they feel powerless. And they don't know how to let go. Sometimes they don't even know it's an option to break away from their dysfunctional family. So, I remember when I was in high school and for a small period of time, I lived with another family. And I remember thinking, I didn't even realize this is how a healthy family lived, that healthy families sat down and ate meals together. Healthy families prayed together. Healthy families, the mom knew when a child had a test and asked them about, how did your test go? Are you ready for your test? Have you studied? Just little things like that. And I think sometimes, you don't know what you don't know, sort of thing. And so, I think that's sometimes why it's difficult to let go of that past, because you just don't even know it's an option.
So where did this process begin for you? When did you come to the realization that you were manifesting the impact, the woundedness of multiple marriages, a lot of different men in and out of your life, which made it very difficult for you to have a consistent, cohesive, and healthy relationship with your mother, because she was looking for her own relation dynamic. So you can't do two things simultaneously. So she can't be out there trying to build her life and relationship with an individual and then do the same thing with you. Right. Simultaneously. And so she made her choices, and it wasn't that she was rejecting you, but it certainly must have felt like she was rejecting you.
Yeah, at times it did. I think I realized, that I needed to sort of break away and make my own way probably towards the end of high school. Like I said, I had lived with that one family, I think during my sophomore year in high school. I'd become a believer my freshman year in high school. And so that's when my faith really started to grow during my sophomore year in high school and just really started to notice, sort of how we had been living and how I wanted to start living, that's when I started getting involved in every sort of um, activity where my faith that would really nourish my faith, whether that was, Fellowship of Christian Athletes or Young Life or on campus Bible studies. We weren't really involved in a church. And so any sort of activity that the school offered that would help grow my faith, I really plugged into that. And so I'm really grateful to the schools for offering that. I went to 3 different high schools. So anytime, a school offered something, I would just jump right in. I'm grateful that the Lord put friends in my life that had strong Christian parents. And, I would just sort of watch from afar how those families operated. And I knew I wanted that. I wanted what those families had. I wanted what those parents had in their marriages. I would just observe, just quietly observe, and was always grateful for the times that I was invited over and that I could just watch and be included. If they ever invited me on weekend trips or just to spend the night, I just knew they had something that I didn't, and I wanted that. And so just kind of tucked that away. And then when I went off to college, same thing. The Lord blessed me with some solid Christian roommates. And that's when I just, really started doing some work on myself there. Again, reading a lot of books and I think as much as I was trying to do some things, I think the Lord was doing a lot in me as far as surrounding me with the right people, friends, parents, and I think just kind of paving that way to help me make some wise decisions and just to break away.
This puts you in quite an unusual category, that you were self-reflective, that you were able to identify what was missing, and you were able to grab a hold of it and recognize that there were places in you, broken branches, if you will, that you found healing through your relationship with other like-minded believers that helped carry you and move you along, grabbed a hold of you, and pulled you forward through all this.
Right.
Is this something that, or let me rephrase, how do we get somebody to the point where they're willing to recognize that their current situation may very well be a product of them having an unreconciled past? I think of Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines makes you check your bags before you get on board. We carry our bags with us through life. Well, you can't get on an airplane today and carry your bags on. You have to check your bags. So they seem to have a better pattern. This requires somebody to say, I don't like my responses. I don't like my relationship with my husband or my wife. I don't like the product, the end product that I'm producing, and I don't know why. And I've looked and I've looked and I've searched, and I just can't see, I'm not an addict. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just not happy. Could it very well be that this underlying ripple, this underlying tear in the fabric of their life is the carryover of having bad examples, the carryover of having bad models? Every one of our parents, I want to believe, has an inherent love for their child. Their expression of that love is convoluted and impacted by how love was expressed to them. They can only model after what they saw.
Right.
Every one of us, I think, walks into life saying, when I have children, I'm never going to say that to my children. I'm never going to be like my mother. I'm never going to be like my father. And all of a sudden, the situation arises where the Coke spills and you react exactly like your mother did or your father did, and you don't know what to do. You're like you're an alien. Some other person comes out of you, and you don't stop to recognize it because you're almost in shock. You're still angry at a
Right.
2-year-old that you gave an open cup to, fully expecting them to manage it properly, and when they didn't manage it properly, you put the burden on them. These are telltale signs that you've got some unreconciled. I'm not saying that everybody has got these deep emotional wounds and everybody's walking around dysfunctional, but the truth of the matter is that my generation used a book on parenting written by a man that didn't have any children.
Yes. So true.
So, all right, we don't know how to deal with this. Our kid has, we look it up. Oh, this is what Dr. Spock says, so this is what we'll do. It was all theoretical.
Right.
They had no model because most of them in my generation were immigrant families, or my whole neighborhood was filled with either immigrant families or first generation. The parents were all first generation Americans. You know, there was a whole lot in this post-war scenario that we're now the grandparents, and look how involved grandparents are. Imagine if you parented dysfunctionally, you were parented dysfunctionally, you parented dysfunctionally, will you not grandparent dysfunctionally?
Right.
So at some point in time, we have to address that God does make us stronger in the broken places, but we first have to, like salvation, we first have to confess. You know what? I got things going on in my relationships and they're not healthy. Could it be that the source of it is that I come from a dysfunctional background? We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask this question and let you think about it, to our audience and to you. Is it ever too late to have a happy childhood?
It's a great question.
We're talking with Elizabeth Oates, author of Mending Broken Branches, When God Reclaims Your Dysfunctional Family Tree. People are longing for wholeness. Most of us come from a family of dysfunction in one way or another. Even if we didn't, we probably perceive it that way. We need to take a healthy look at ourselves, what we faced, and how to get through it. And when we come back from break, Elizabeth is going to walk us through some of this process. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Ignatian and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Ignatian YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Ignatian. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Ignatian, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking to Elizabeth Oates, author of the new book, Mending Broken Branches, When God Reclaims Your Dysfunctional Family Tree. Elizabeth, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, in Mending Broken Branches, you kind of lay out in sections, first the past, then the present, then the future. In order for us to deal with any issue in our life, we have to look back. Now, Paul says, you know, that, not that I've accomplished all this, but this I do, forgetting what's behind, I press on to the mark of the high calling. And so a lot of people say, well, don't look back. It didn't work for Lot's wife. You know, Paul says, you know, press on, press on. God will carry you through this. God will fix it. Your past makes you unique and contributes to the uniqueness of, but we carry a lot of things with us that if we don't take at least time to put it in perspective, refocus the lens, we could be looking at our past through this very, very blurry, scarred, scratched lens that, like dirty glasses. I mean, how many people, you wear glasses, I wear glasses. Yes. How many times I've had people come up to me and say, you need to clean your glasses. And I don't even realize just how dirty they are. And it impacts our vision. So how do we, what is your approach to really reviewing the past and putting it in perspective?
Yeah, I think where we get caught up is yes, we don't want to dwell on the past. We don't want to stay stuck there. But I think that's what a lot of us are doing is we're just staying stuck and we're not processing it and working through the pain so that then we can embrace our present and move into a healthier future. If we will process it in a productive way, then we can leave it behind, like Paul says. But a lot of us are just stuck there. We're just like a hamster on a wheel, just spinning, 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 and not being productive. So let's work through those painful issues, and then let's leave them behind for good.
Are we delving into the area of a bitter root and unforgiveness? Are we coming to the core of what the entire Bible is focused on, is our reconciliation in this ministry? And Paul writes about it in 2 Corinthians 5:17 that you're called to a ministry of reconciliation. Isn't that the underlying theme factor, is that I'm carrying wounds from the past that on the surface look healed, but if I touch them, they still hurt, which means they're infected.
Right.
They have to be opened back up. They have to heal properly from the inside out until all that's left is that remaining and always fading scars. The scar the day of the operation and the scar 10 years later are entirely different because of God's healing power.
Right.
So are we dealing with the area of a bitter root of unforgiveness, and are we holding our parents out, or grandparents, or whoever it is we have this dysfunctional relationship with, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, coaches, teachers, whatever it was, that we have this? Are we forgetting what we have been forgiven of when we hold up people out to another standard that says, but you don't understand how bad it was. You don't understand what they did or what they said. Does that fall right into that category of a bitter root and unforgiveness?
Yes, absolutely. We're refusing to, like you said, we're refusing to go there to open that wound. So we're just letting it fester and get worse and worse over the years. And really, I think this is pretty common. People have probably heard this, but the one who's really suffering is you, not them. The longer we carry this wound. And it's so painful to open these wounds, but it's so temporary. I think if we would realize that it will hurt, it will be painful for a little while, but then it will get so much better. And I think the anticipation of how hard it's going to be to work through our past is always worse than actually working through the past. It will be hard for a little while, but once you work through it, it will get so much better. And we just have to be willing to do the hard work. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to go there. They would rather stay stuck where they are than face, the unknown of how hard it's going to be.
It's so interesting that there are probably from our perspective, excuse me, a lot of people who we would want to send to therapy, but they would absolutely refuse. So this really doesn't fall in the category of self-help. This is a biblically grounded, Christ-centered view of going back and cleaning out the wound.
Right.
It's not denying that there's a wound. It's cleaning it out so it can be healed healthfully, and you can recover from it. So I guess you never are too old to have a happy childhood.
No, not at all. If it were self-help, we would have helped ourselves a long time ago, and we'd all be healed. There's no way you can help yourself apart from Jesus. And it is very biblically based. There's a lot of practical tools. There's, it's filled with scripture. There's a lot of places to journal. I love what you just said. it's never too late to have a happy childhood. We can't rewrite history. We can't undo all the things that have already been done to us, but we can gain a new perspective. We can go back and look at our childhood. We can gain some empathy and understanding for who our parents were and what they endured as children or even as adults. We can understand our siblings better. We can understand even just our larger family dynamic a little bit better, and how that played into our childhood and growing up years. We can also just understand ourselves a little bit better, and how we reacted and how we contributed to our childhood. And then we can even just reflect on some different memories. I think I even leave space in there to maybe write down some happy memories, because life is not one dimensional. There's lots of different facets that make up our childhood, and we can't forget the good times. Even if life was really hard, we all have at least one happy memory, and we don't want to lose that in the midst of all the junk that we went through.
As you're talking about that, I can't help but reflect on the life of Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one of my favorite stories.
And the total dysfunctionality, and how God used that separation, that tearing away, to create the one that would be positioned to send for the 70,
yes,
to bring restoration, and even use 400 years of slavery and bondage, which has got to be the worst possible scenario, to create the nation that would give birth to the Messiah.
Right.
All throughout that story, if you were to talk to Joseph and say, hey, how's your relationship with your family? Oh, you mean that the brothers that tossed me in the pit, the one that sold me to the Ishmaelites? You mean those guys? I hate them.
Right.
But in the final words in Genesis 50, in the last chapter, he says to them, what you meant for evil, God worked for his good so that many would be saved.
Yeah.
Do we have our own Joseph stories? Are we supposed to have our own Joseph stories? Because the families of the Bible, I'm trying to think of who was the model family in the Bible. It certainly wasn't Rahab, but she gave birth to Boaz, who married Ruth, who was born out of incest. Well, that's certainly not the model family.
Right.
Noah, no, that certainly wasn't the model family. David, no, that's the model. That's not the model family. You mean the entirety of the Bible is filled with stories of dysfunctional families, multiple wives, the prospect of divorce, but don't divorce this woman you married that's a harlot, and let her keep on being. Don't get rid of the prostitute, Gomer. You need to stick with her. Is that the model? So the Bible should be preparing us to look at the realities that there are no perfect families. There's only perfection in Christ. And so when I look at my own family, I'm supposed to look at them through the lens of Messiah, not through the natural lens of I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, the words that they spoke into me. God, they weren't speaking for God. God speaks to you on his own.
Right.
He's got his own record of his message for you. So how do we then work through that past? We now have addressed it. We've realized that our families are no different than the families of the Bible. There's not a single one of our families that are any different. And I look at some of these really amazing families out there. I've run into incredible families. One of my board members has an incredible family, but they're not perfect. Okay? They just choose to find joy in being a family. They make a conscious choice to find joy even in their 2-year-old being rushed to the emergency room with chronic asthma. Terrible, terrible asthma. He's finally grown out of it, but I remember how many times they were there. But they all went, and they all were there to support him. And even in crisis, they were strong in their faith that kept them from being pulled apart or having the other siblings jealous because they were always focusing on the one sick child. So if we make it through our past, how does that impact our present, and what does that do for our future?
It's a good question. If we make it through our past, how does it impact our present? Well, hopefully God has done a great work in transforming our character. Like you mentioned, Joseph, God used his past to transform his character. We see a very immature, sort of bratty young boy who then was very humbled and became a strong, faithful young man full of integrity and virtue and honesty, and was entrusted with a lot as far as just the nation and its wealth and in his job. And so I think when it comes to our past impacting our present, hopefully God takes our past and he uses that to draw us closer to him, to transform our character. I can look at my past and think, wow, throughout everything, I was pretty immature. I mean, yeah, I was also a kid, but, I was a pretty immature kid. I think without everything I'd gone through, I probably would have had a lot of entitlement, just have that. I think I would have had that mentality of, not as much work ethic, let's put it that way. I ended up going to college and having to work my way through college, as hard as that was. And that was really difficult. I went to Baylor, which is a pretty expensive school. And, the kids that go there, most of them are supported by their parents. And so that was difficult at times emotionally to watch my friends just get everything handed to them. And here I am working 30 to 40 hours a week. But in the long run, I think my character needed that, because I think going into it, I probably would have had that mentality that, well, I deserve this. I deserve to be handed, money and a free ride to college. So as difficult as it was, God was molding my character. So I think if you can make it through your past, God will use that to mold your character. He will use it to draw you closer to him. And then he will use it for you to impact other people. And isn't that what we are called to in the Bible? To love God and to love others. Those are the greatest commandments. So use your past to draw closer to God, and then to impact other people, to love other people. And I can say this because loving other people, that is not my strength. My strengths are action. I am an action-oriented person. I get things done. I am administrative and a go-getter. And I really have to slow down and focus on people and not activity. And so I can say God has really done a work in me to slow me down, to help me focus on people and people's needs, and really say, Elizabeth, like this person, they need to hear your story. They need hope, and they need to hear that you have hope and you can give them hope. And so really, if you just look at your past and how God has protected you and taken care of you, and maybe it didn't feel like it in the moment, but here you are, you're alive and you're breathing and you've lived to tell about it. And, he did protect you, maybe not in the way you wanted or the way you expected or the way you think you deserved, but he did protect you. And so now you have hope, and you can tell your story to someone else who needs hope.
In your marriage, as you were working through your past and developing new communication tools and boundaries and styles and How did you see that transform? Because what I want people to realize is that if you mend these broken branches, that if you think about how you would fix a branch, there's tape. There's
Right.
actually, and the tape is placed around the break, and then eventually the tape is absorbed and it becomes integrated into the branch, and the bark begins to go around that, and it ultimately expands with the tree, and is no longer apparent that that's where the graft or the break was. So there is hope that once I've mended the broken branch, that I'm now going to start producing fruit from a branch that was once broken and hanging and not producing fruit because it wasn't being nourished properly. It was somewhat disconnected. It was a part of the tree, but it was somewhat disconnected from the tree. Now it's integrated, and a certain wholeness comes into it. That became your present, and is also becoming a part of your future.
Yes.
So in your book, in these last 6 or 7 minutes, let's talk about the future. You have a chapter, helping your husband understand you. The concept seems quite foreign because we're already in this marriage.
Right.
And that men are from Mars, women are from Venus, they're not supposed to understand you. There's the conflict began in the garden. It's always going to be that way. We'll just grab a hold of Dr. Gary Chapman and we'll figure out the love languages. Once we do that, we're good. That's it. But those are expressions and finding a way to appreciate and speak the language, but that doesn't necessarily bring understanding of what you've been through, why you reacted in the past, because you have a past broken branch in your existing relationship that is the residual of the broken branch of the past. So you also have to mend the broken branch of the present.
Right.
That was the result of the broken branch of the past.
Sure.
So in your chapter on health, in the area called the future, healthy soil for growth, helping your husband understand you, give me some recommendations, give me some tools, give me some scripture that people can realize that even after 30 years, even after 40 years, they can find, they don't have to have that conversation with their friends, say, you know, my husband, I don't talk to my husband, he doesn't understand me. We do everything together. We've been married for 40 years. That's just how we are. Mm-hmm. Okay? We write it off. We justify it. But it could be so much better.
Yeah. So, yes, connecting with my husband was a whole new level of, as you said, recovery. When Brandon and I got married, we approached marriage from two different viewpoints. He grew up in a very healthy family, grandparents married forever, parents married, came from just generations of healthy marriages. And obviously I did not. And so we had to really work at healthy communication, healthy conflict resolution. In our first year of marriage, when we would get in arguments, he said, he thought, wait, why are we arguing? I've never even seen arguments. What, are we getting a divorce? What's going on? And I would get in arguments we would get in arguments and I wouldn't understand why he didn't want to argue back. It was just confusing me because that's all I ever saw was people arguing. And so it was really difficult. And I remember him saying to me that whole first year, we're on the same team. We're on the same team. And that concept of being on the same team was very foreign to me because all I had ever seen was married people fighting against one another, everybody looking out for their own best interests. And so that's always my number one piece of advice for married couples is to remember that you are on the same team and that you are no longer looking out for yourself. You are now looking out for the interest of the marriage, not the interest of one or the interest of the other, but the interest of the marriage. And that's probably been the number one thing that has helped us is what is best for us, not me, not you, but for us and for the marriage. And so we have come a long way, and it's not come without a price. It's not come without a lot of hard work. We've gone to counseling a couple different times throughout our marriage. I think around year 7 and probably around year 14. Just hit a couple rough patches where, we weren't anywhere near divorce, but just felt like, we're kind of at a place where I think we need just kind of a revamping and need an outside party to kind of help us work through a few issues. And so we always recommend for people also, don't be afraid of counseling. There is nothing wrong with it or shameful about it, but it is really a great tool to help you just invest in your marriage. And, just like you would invest in a weekend getaway or books or, a marriage retreat, invest in some counseling. It's great. Who wouldn't want to go talk about themselves for an hour, And so we've done that. We've gone to marriage retreats, and it's really been helpful, I think, for us to connect. And that's really what we want in marriage, is to connect with our Lord and to connect with each other.
We've been talking with Elizabeth Oates, author of Mending Broken Branches, When God Reclaimed Your Dysfunctional Family Tree. This is the hush word of the day, is yes. We all come from a dysfunctional family. Now, how do we deal with that? How do we reconcile that? And how do we bring value? How do we harvest out of our past the good things that we want to hold on to in our present? And what do we want to invest in our children? The concept of apologizing to your child was something that was so new to me. I had never heard of such a thing. Mm-hmm. What do you mean apologize to your child? But once I got to the point where I got past my pride and my upbringing and went to my child and apologized, the whole dynamic relationship changed, because all of a sudden I was taking ownership of my error and apologizing for how, and it's brought tremendous healing. I have a 28-year-old daughter that I adopted her at birth, and brought tremendous growth and tremendous closeness because of just that one concept. My parents wouldn't think of ever offering an apology for anything they ever said and did. That just wasn't the model. But I recommend to all our audience that if you think about it and it quickens you in your spirit that you do come from a dysfunctional family, and there's things you're exhibiting that you don't even understand why you react the way you do. And it does puzzle you, and it does bother you, it does make you question, but you brush it off because you don't know the answer. Your answer may be found right here in how to mend that broken branch. I strongly recommend everyone who comes from a family, and you all come from a family, you all had a mother and father, maybe together, maybe apart, but nevertheless, we all come into this earth the same way. Mending Broken Branches is a tool for you to navigate through your own healing using the scriptures and using this book as a guide that could save your past, renew your present, and ensure your future for both you and your family. Elizabeth Oates, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you for having me.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.